I'm going to be talking to Seton Stiebert, who's an economic modeler, and he has prepared an analysis for the Canadian Climate Institute that brings forward the Canadian greenhouse gas emissions data 8 months earlier than the federal government does. Now, I'm not entirely sure why that's important, but he's going to explain it to us. So welcome to the interview, Seton.
Thanks, Markham.
Now, I use this data in a very broad sense, as many people do, but never think about getting into the meat of the data itself. And I understand that there's a 16th month lag between when the government collects the data and when it releases it. So why is the Climate Institute bringing this change, providing an estimate that's 8 months sooner? Why is that important?
Yeah, it's true. Like, we rely on this national inventory report. The 16-month lag is a bit of a problem. There are all kinds of policy decisions and pieces of understanding that we need to accelerate in the future. We have a lot of policies that are coming online and on stream, and we need to know whether they're working and they're biting. And this delay is always creating this sense of not evaluation until the last minute.
Okay, I can get that. I mean, we live in the internet age, right? Things happen a lot quicker than they used to. So is it important for the government to be able to see as early as possible whether a particular policy has an effect so that they can modify it or get rid of it and bring in another one if necessary?
I mean, I think the government probably has internally some idea of where emissions are and how they circulate that. We don't know. But externally, there are a lot of agencies, right? The Climate Institute being one, where we want information into the hands of people to be able to advocate and look for opportunities to reduce emissions. And so I think more information, the more sharing, the more transparency, the more challenging of the information, the better.
Well, let's get into some of the information, the data that you've presented in this report for 2021. And as I understand it, we're now at 691 megatons of CO2 equivalent per year for the country. And I thought that we had peaked out at about 730, and that's where we were at, but apparently that's not the case.
Yeah, so I mean, something really interesting happened in the last 2 years, right? The COVID pandemic really drove down emissions to their lowest level in many years. And so compared to 2019, emissions fell, 30 megatons or something. And in the 2021 period, we do see some rebound of emissions, but not nearly as much as we might have expected that rebound effect given the fall in activity.
Now, in your report, you talk about the decoupling of emissions from economic growth. I've seen this referred to in other countries. Could you explain what you mean by that, please?
Well, decoupling of growth is exactly what we need, right? We still want wealth and growth in the economy and goods sold. But at the same time, we want to reduce our greenhouse gas emission intensity for every unit of production. So we measure intensity as the amount of emissions, the tons of CO2 emissions per unit of GDP, per dollar of GDP. We are seeing steady decoupling effect where we are using per unit of GDP produced, we are generating less and less emissions with that.
Yeah, I guess so that's the good news. Now, what do we have to, but we're a long ways away from where we need to be, and your project is called 440 tons or megatons because that's where we need to be in 2030. So we've got 250 megatons roughly of emissions reduction to achieve. That seems like a really big target.
It is, and this is the point. We can track progress to this point, and really we've seen some improvements of emission intensity every year, but it's not enough. right? We need to accelerate that. And we know there are a lot of new policies that are being implemented and put in place, and we expect to see them to increase the emission reductions every year. So that's the expectation, but we haven't been able to measure it and see it yet.
Yeah, I can see from the public's point of view. I mean, the public, just takes a very broad approach to this. But we've heard for years and years, oh, emissions are increasing, they're increasing, we have to get them down. But once they've peaked and start to come down, like, if that's what's going to happen, I can see where it builds a little momentum and people start saying, well, okay, great, we're making some progress. Maybe we should do more. Maybe we should look at that electric vehicle or that heat pump for our home, or maybe they own a business and they have opportunities to reduce emissions there. So it's almost like, if you can see if the emissions peak, the narrative changes.
Yeah, I think so. And I think also that we start to look at the sectors, right? Every sector is different, right? We have building emissions in some sectors. So transport emissions still went up in between 2020 and 2021 because everybody started driving again after the COVID pandemic. But they didn't go up as much as they would have maybe normally. And maybe with a normal growth, to 2023 and 2024, we'll really start to see that curve bend down because people are driving electric cars, because they're changing habits and driving down demand for passenger transportation. That's what we want to see.
Well, Seton, we'll look forward to talking to you again in the spring when you've got the 2022 data available. And with any luck, our emissions will have dropped by then. So thank you very much for this.
Thanks very much for the interview.